Well, hello everyone, and today I'm talking to Gai Jorayev, who's an intrepid archaeologist and has led tours to Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan for Andante travels. He works for the University of London and specializes in mapping and modern technologies applied to the age-old art of archaeology. I was very lucky to travel with him a few years ago to explore the dead cities of the steppes of Karakolpakstan and to visit fabulous Samarkand. And we're going to be having a little chat today just about him and his work. Hello, Guy.
Hi,
Well,
Oliver.
it's good to see you, I have to say. And we have 20 minutes or so in which to have a chat about your archaeology and travels. And let me just set the clock going and we'll see where we get to. Okay, we're off. Let's just start with you, I think, to begin with. You were born as a citizen of the Soviet Union, I believe. Where and when did that actually happen?
Yeah, I was indeed. I was born in 1979 in eastern parts of Turkmenistan, a former republic of the Soviet Union, near the Amudarya River. I grew up in the remotest, one of the remote villages in the region, between the big river Amudarya and the big desert, Karakum Desert. So that's where my childhood was, and I started school in 1985, very much as a Soviet citizen, Soviet child. And by 1991, as everyone knows, the Soviet Union started to crumble, and these countries of Central Asia, they were basically thrown into this new reality of independence. And I started university in 1997. I think between the 1991 and 1997, it became clear that there is no return to a old union and that these countries will need to be independent states. But that also in a way informed my later research in heritage and nation building, how the politics of heritage changed, for example. And then I started university in tourism studies, and then ended up working for European Union on the technical projects in Turkmenistan, but actually also traveled to the UK for the first time in year 2000 to Bournemouth University as an exchange student, and that influenced my trajectory in a way, increased the interest in learning English, and also learning a little bit more about this country where I ended up being now.
That's an interesting path to becoming an archaeologist. Actually, it's not exactly the normal way of going about things. Normally, archaeologists, rather like me, start off with archaeology and then sort of end up going into cultural heritage management and tourism and things like that. What inspired you? What was it that actually inspired you to take up archaeology?
Yes, well, there was a accident in a way meeting and with my long-term mentor and supervisor Tim Williams, who works at UCL Institute of Archaeology, where I now work with him very closely under his leadership. We do several projects together, and I met him in Turkmenistan, and he was in charge of a big UCL project called Ancient Merv Project, focused around the major archaeological site, well-known site of Merv, cities of Merv. And because I spoke very good Turkmen language, the local languages, I also speak Russian and all of the local awareness, everything. So they asked me to join their expedition for a month. So I took an annual leave from my main job at that time, again working for European Union, and ended up loving it. So it was a good that being on the field, the sense of small discoveries every day, and all the friendships, and a gin and tonic on top of a medieval wall just before the sunset. All of those things really, I was hooked in a way. And also Tim has this ability of many archaeologists will have after working in an archaeological site for decades. He explained Merv in such a way, although I knew the monument beforehand, I never heard all of these intricate details and the very intimate knowledge of the archaeologists. And that was the reason that I ended up working with them twice a year on site, and then ended up traveling to UCL, and then ended up starting my master's degree in year 2007. The master's degree now I coordinate myself, so after many years. So that was the beginning, and then I did little bit internships with organizations like UNESCO, and did a lot more work with different organizations focusing around heritage management. and focusing around heritage documentation, and then returned back to UCL in year 2009 to start my PhD.
Gosh, I mean, no wonder you ended up working with Andante as well. Gin and tonics on top of ancient walls. That sounds absolutely perfect as a sort of introduction to the way we like to do our tours. But yes, it's I can only really agree with you, I think, on everything you've just said there. The whole process of archaeological discovery is something which it's like a fix. It's like a drug. You get involved in it and engaged with it, and all the people and the personalities, and that in many ways is as much a part of the process as any sort of scientific reasoning that actually goes with it. I've always thought that archaeologists should be akin to magicians and musicians, but magicians particularly, because of course they're conjuring up the past from these small things that they're finding, and in a way we have that sort of key, that control over past times. Do you see it like that?
I do. I actually studied and spent also time doing a lot of public outreach work, mainly very early on in my learning this big world of archaeology. I was influenced by Mike Corbusley, another great mentor who teaches archaeology and education at UCL, and ended up doing many public outreach activities with him, learned a lot from him and the other colleagues as well, and still very much love this outreach element of it, explaining to people not only the big picture, but also small details of process of archaeology. And I'm always surprised how magical it is, and how it really engages different age groups and different education categories, different people. And in some sense, where the tourism and the cultural heritage comes together, is one of those areas where it really excites me, and that's why we ended up collaborating, and I ended up working with Andante on this area. And still, also I continue working with organizations like World Tourism Organization, for example, especially around the Central Asian archaeological sites, trying to open up those sites to more visitors, both international and local. So yes, I completely agree. It is a bit like that feeling of creating magic for external audiences, non-specialist audiences, that really engaged me. Although having said that, many of your guests are they're bigger specialists than myself. Of course, they know a lot more about archaeological sites than I do sometimes. So I keep learning from them as well.
It's well, what a place to be able to practice archaeology, Central Asia. I mean, our brief travels together there when we were establishing the Uzbekistan tour really bowled me over. And I know now that if I had my time again, I wouldn't be studying the boring old Romans. I would go for Central Asian archaeology, where you can just hear the footstep of history behind you as you go through that extraordinary landscape with its ruins and the ever-shifting streams of civilization. No, the one that really sticks in my mind is our visit to Ayaz Kala, that series of fortresses right at the north of the Oxus, the Amudaya. And I just remember standing up there. It was February, I think. It was a freezing wind. And I remember standing up there, looking out northwards and thinking, my God, this is where Herodotus runs out of words. And everything to the north, that oceans of grass, is the unknown world, the unknown part of the ancient world. I mean, if I had to choose a site that really summed up Central Asia for me, it'd be that one, I think, in a way, and its history. But you must have a particular favorite out of all those amazing places. Which is yours?
Well, absolutely. I think to start with, in general, I agree completely that diversity of landscape, but also diversity of archaeology and also time depth that Central Asia has, and Central Asia being that center of a big landmass, I think that helps a lot in terms of bringing up all of those archaeological sites. Very difficult to choose a favorite out of them, but I think the Merv, because of the long-term association and the deeper knowledge than any other archaeological site in Central Asia, Merv is my favorite archaeological sites, and it is a wonderful place to visit in general. and then probably followed by Otrar oasis in Kazakhstan, in South Kazakhstan, again, because we worked there for several years, and I still take students there occasionally from UCL and all of that. And then very recently, I actually fallen in love with Khiva, the late medieval city, as you will remember, the very much of a living heritage place. And that's because I spent the last couple of years doing some research work there, working with organizations like EBRD and the UNWTO World Tourism Organization and Smithsonian institution at Ichankala itself, at that historical core of Khiva. And then having that more in-depth knowledge and also having connections with local people, local specialists, local colleagues, local museum specialists, made me a little bit, not little bit, made me completely fall in love with the place. So I think the hierarchy will be Merv, Otrar, and the Khiva, the three top places for me. But there's so much more. Yes, Ayaz Kala, Toprak Kala, all of these edges of Karakalpakstan and all of those mud and mud brick monuments, but also famous rock art site in Kazakhstan, for example, Tamgali, one of my favorite places, and a lot of more recent heritage places as well.
No, I would agree with you. Khiva, the wonderful Arabian Night city. Yes, I can see why that has attractions. I have to say, I was rather taken by the blue bling of fabulous Samarkand. I mean, you've only got to walk around the ruins of Samarkand, or the still standing, functioning buildings of Samarkand, to realise that their builder Tamerlane knew he was going to rule the world. He just knew it. Just the sheer size of the things he was putting up. It's most extraordinary place. I mean, having seen a lot of these places now for myself, I appreciate that there's dealing with them in an archaeological sense is extremely difficult. Even a place like Pikend we visited, the completely dead city, but goes on for miles. I mean, how do you deal with something like that with modern archaeological technique? I can see this is where your own sort of specializations in the use of GIS and mapping and remote sensing data of all sorts really does allow you to sort of leap ahead of the poor old truffle hunter who's following along, digging his little holes, trying to put some story together. Because I can't see any other way you would handle some of these places. They are just so enormous. I mean, how does your work have a bearing on this sort of archaeology?
Absolutely, I think there is a role for good old archaeology in all of those places, of course. But documentation and understanding the larger landscape of Central Asia is becoming one of the priorities for me personally, because as you mentioned, that interest in things like GIS, but also digital means of documentation and also monitoring the change over time as well. So that's becoming more of a main area of my interests now, and we do have several interesting projects in that area. Of course, we started using things like unmanned aerial vehicles or drones many years ago, almost a decade ago. And we also rely heavily on satellite imagery and the different means of remote sensing, partly because of the needs of documentation and creating that layer of information that the future specialists will benefit from, but also trying to put the old layers of information together with the modern layers of information, and to answer not only archaeological or heritage management questions, but also questions such as climate change or food sustainability in the region, and as you will know, ever-changing water irrigation systems in the region. So all of those things. And we have currently we have a big project called Central Asian Archaeological Landscapes, funded by charity Arcadia. And we run it from UCL, but very much in collaboration with Central Asian institutions, all 5 Central Asian stans, and also Xinjiang, the Uyghur Autonomous Republic of China. They're all involved. And one of the goals there, one of the main goals there, is creating this geospatial database of archaeological information that has already more than a century history in terms of Central Asia. Early Russian military specialists started recording archaeological sites, and since then, of course, the Soviet academia created a very substantial data sets, and both written and drone, and also photographic data, different types of recording. And we're trying to bring all of that into the digital world and create a big portal, information portal in a way that will allow all the colleagues interested in the region to start asking bigger questions and the larger questions, and seeing more connections between the archaeological sites. But also, hopefully, that type of information will help with the management. So the one of the major goals is handing over not only the data, but also tools to local institutions of archaeological heritage management. So the any decision made in terms of the development, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the protection measures that are taken on the basis of best available scientific data. So that's one of the big areas I'm currently involved in. And the Tim Williams, again, as I mentioned, my long-term mentor, he leads that project, and there are several of us, I think, in general, around 80 people involved in that project in Central Asia and at UCL and here.
It's interesting you mentioned your Soviet predecessors there, because of course they undertook their own very extensive works in the whole area of Central Asia, which at that time, of course, was one united zone, and so it was fairly easy to move from place to place to undertake work of one sort or another. But the sheer scale on which they were working rather dwarfed anything which was happening in Western Europe. I know we're all very proud of the big excavations that were undertaken in places like Egypt or in Italy and so forth, but they were minuscule in the scale, in conception and actual carrying through. And I think the Soviet archaeologists of the interwar period and after the Second World War had their own air force basically to do aerial survey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a sense, we talk about the multidisciplinary approaches now a lot in archaeology, but in some sense, especially as you mentioned, that multi-war period, between two wars, between First World War and Second World War, when people like Tolstoy starting a big teams researching Khwarezm region, they were truly multidisciplinary teams. They had ethnographers recording the local customs, they had architects, they had environmental specialists, they had geologists, and of course they could afford flying several planes, small planes, but nevertheless planes, to take aerial photography of large areas, which we are currently digitizing and trying to put them together with the late information. There is also an element that I keep coming back now quite often in my discussions with colleagues, that there was a sense that was the peak of everything. So the Soviet Union, this is the time when everything needs to be recorded before the big change happens. And then the big change indeed happened. The big RLC, of course, the obvious example of that, but the entire region has changed in terms of how agriculture was done, how the other activities were done, which then ended up damaging archaeological resource quite substantially as well.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we're now in the middle of a most extraordinary period of history, this global pandemic, which seems to have brought the entire world to a shuddering stop. But of course, through the magic of technology in one form or another, a lot of the work that we actually do carries on. I mean, I can talk to people all the way across the world face to face, but I probably won't be able to travel to see them for some time to come. An awful lot of what I've done in my own projects, for example, in Italy and Albania, and what you're doing in Central Asia is, as you say, determined to try and encourage people to visit these places, to use them as a proper economic resource. How do you think that's likely to turn out now after the dust settles of the COVID-19 panic?
We keep talking about this quite a lot, actually, with colleagues who are at this intersection of heritage tourism, and in particularly that sustainable tourism area. That's a growing force, as you know, in a tourism business in general. And there are obviously two major lines of thought right now, and the one more optimistic version presumes that the world will come back to traveling again, because people have this natural interest in places, and as we know very well from our own work, to go to places and see places, and interest for learning more about the outside world. But this may allow us to do things more sustainably. In other words, we might actually start organizing tourism that brings more benefits directly to the local communities, for example. Well, that changes the structures that were very difficult to change. I advised in certain occasions, I advised the government officials in the past in their tourism strategies, and it was very difficult for them to stop, to change things comprehensively. So this created a stop. However painful that might be, it was beyond our control, and stop now happened. And there is a chance for some of them to rethink their tourism strategies and to focus on more, not only sustainable, but also on especially in places like Central Asia, where heritage is the core resource, not some, although nature is interesting too, but the heritage still remains the main resource. And creating better information systems to provide better interpretation in different languages for to achieve better training of the local specialists. All of those things are suddenly possible now. Now, it's still a task for them to undertake those steps, but nevertheless, I think it's very encouraging to see organizations like World Tourism Organization currently already thinking about those things and already taking some steps towards that.
Fantastic stuff.
I am more on the optimistic side. Sorry.
Good. Yes. So am I in the long term, and I'm very jealous. And as much as I like the Balkans, I have to say what you're doing in Central Asia is something that really engages me. I fear, however, we've talked ourselves out of time. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure there's much more we can talk about next time we meet. But thank you, Guy, very, very much for sharing your insights and giving us a little bit of background about yourself. That's wonderful. And hopefully you will be leading I know you'll be leading Andante tours well into 2022. So that's something which we've all got to look forward to. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and also a pleasure to lead your tours. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye for now.